Tuesday, June 16th, 2015 to order. First agenda item is approval of the minutes of May 19th, 2015.
Roll call.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, roll call, please.
All right. Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Batty?
Here.
Mr. Pfeil-Metzger?
Here.
Mr. Jessic? Mr. Gary Johnson?
Here.
Mr. LaSalle?
Here.
Mr. McEnroe?
Here.
Mr. Steve Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Mahoney?
Here.
Okay, now I'll jump ahead to approval of the minutes of May 19th, 2015. Does anybody have any corrections or amendments to those minutes? Doesn't look like it.
I move that the minutes be accepted.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. The agenda analysis, does anybody have anything they want to move on the agenda or add to? Okay, that'll stay as it is. Citizen comments. We have two. And welcome to all the guests, by the way. It's always nice to have citizens visit us at our meetings. We have Michael Simon and Louise Akanyu. You can both come up at the same time.
My name is Louise Aganyu, and I live at 101 Center Street. And so it was 1 year ago today that I first came to speak to this committee. And I know because my birthday is June 17th. So I think I want to thank you all and Public Works, because actually, you know, some things have been accomplished. I see that there's $5,000 set aside for traffic calming, which is awesome. Not nearly enough, but it's a start. We have a part-time retired Oregon State Police officer for traffic. That's awesome. I've seen him give tickets. That's very good. And there's a mission statement. Public Works has a mission statement for traffic calming. That's really good. It's probably not as quite as strong as one would want, but it's a start again. So I'm feeling that some things have been accomplished in 1 year. However, you know, we still have the same problems. Yeah, yeah. So since this is a historic neighborhood, I think it's a great opportunity to slow it down. And I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I have this wonderful website. It's called Project for Public Spaces, and there's a section in there called Traffic Calming 101. Project for Public Spaces. And it gives some really good ideas. And I know, I mean, I'm no expert. I don't know what the first step is, but maybe painting lines or some temporary ideas would be a good start. We have to start somewhere. And with all the expansions going on in Oregon City, I envision more and more traffic. So I think it's a great opportunity right now to get a start on this so that we don't all of a sudden have this influx of more traffic causing more problems for us in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Okay, just to bring you up to date on my activities, this Thursday I have the last two neighborhood association meetings I'm going to tackle the traffic concerns in those neighborhoods. And then I've also gone to all the primary schools and middle schools to introduce the TAC to the principals, and I've got the contact information for all the presidents of the PTAs or PTOs, whatever the case may be in each school. So we'll be continuing to move along. I hope you understand it's a slow process.
I do understand that,
But
yes.
it's quite a project, and we're planning to forge ahead.
Yeah.
Would it be out of order to wish her a happy birthday, or is that just?
Yeah, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
But I'm sure not going to ask you to sing.
Thank you very much.
Bob
Oh, can I ask one question?
Sure.
I just wondered what the status of TAC approaching the city commissioners is regarding the Traffic Safety Month or whatever's might be
Funny you
coming
should
up.
mention that, because I gave the tax yearly report to the last commission meeting, and at that time I told them that we were starting this safety program, that we were just in the baby steps. We didn't have anything to present to them, but we asked for their support and guidance on that project. So, in fact, we just had a city commissioner join our meeting, Brian Shaw, in the back of the room, so he can testify to that. So, yeah, we're taking those little steps, and we'll get there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You betcha.
Chair, can I say, Bob, can I say one thing?
Yes.
With regard to that particular item, there is another item, and I want to say it's not July 1st, it's the third Wednesday in July, so maybe that's the 17th. Can't remember the date. But the Oregon City Police Department is going to be talking about the safety measures that they've been implementing and some additional ideas that they've been talking about. At the last meeting, you might remember Bill Clur was here, one of our police officers. I can't remember if you were here last. We talked about that additional traffic safety officer that you talked about. They talked about what are called red light cameras in town, which they're now considering safety cameras as opposed to red light cameras. Might have a little nicer connotation about it. And we've also been collaborating a little bit with them on this whole safety campaign. And Bob's right, we don't really have a safety campaign, but we've been talking about that safety campaign. So we expect to make gains on that, and so they're considering that part of their safety program as well. So, and they'll be presenting that to the City Commission. I think it's on the 17th.
That's the third Wednesday, I think it's the 15th.
15th. Okay. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you. Michael Simon.
Thank you. My name is Michael Simon. I'm on 1005 Fifth Street, and I presented kind of a phone book document on the process of Myers Road, so forth corridor, and presenting my objections to the manner in which it was done and documenting those. And I'm not sure, it's kind of a lengthy document, and I'm not sure that it might possibly be best in 2 months. There's going to be a recess for 2 months. Would it be better to have a discussion on this when everyone's familiar with it? Or should I just kind of go through it now? I can kind of read my summary. I mean, I kind of vocalized what my objections were. I'm not sure how you folks
I
would
guess
like to handle it.
my question would be where you want to go with this. I mean, is there an objective that we need to look at?
There kind of is. There are, I guess. The overall process just left out basically the elected people in politics and the citizens in the steps it was done. And when it was presented to the elected people and the public, it had already been signed off. So making it a kind of an arduous process to change it. And kind of and then Lynn Avenue and Myers and Leland Road don't meet the physical classification of minor arterials as defined by the Oregon City Transportation Plan, Master Plan. And the process really followed filling out the appropriate paperwork without really any input. And I kind of highlighted that with the, on reference 8, with a speed zone request form that was filled out by Mr. Frazier, and where it asked about recommendations from the local residents. The wording would be kind of odd because it was stated there were 2 phone calls, anonymous phone calls, that triggered those. One wanting the speed lowered to 25 on Leland, and one wanting to raise it from 25 to 35 on Lynn.
Yeah, I recall
And
all
then
of
the
that,
word-
and I think that John Lewis has responded that future traffic studies, the neighborhood associations would be notified that those are taking place, which I think would be the first step, because that has to take place before any other action is taken.
I think that would
And
be very
considering
reasonable.
the length of the document and the amount of time that we could spend on it, I think it would be more appropriate if you would contact John Lewis and perhaps ask this to be a future agenda item
Okay,
rather than citizen comments.
I think that would be very reasonable, because it
Yeah.
is kind of, has a lot of pages in it.
There's a lot of possible discussion, and we can't get it done in 3 minutes citizen comments, that's for
No,
sure.
I think that's a very reasonable
Yeah.
suggestion.
So why don't you pursue that? And knowing, of course, that we'll be in recess in July and August unless some dire circumstances arise, but we could get it
I
somewhere.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I know John Lewis is busy. He does more than just this. He does the whole ball of wax.
We can carve out some time to go through that. I know it's worth the time given the time you put into it already. So I'd be happy to do that. I think that the bottom line is the speed study, whether you felt like it was a good public process or not, it was done in accordance with the state law and the state traffic engineers' expectations. And speed limits aren't set necessarily by a vote or full buy-in of the neighborhoods, but at the same time, there may be some balance there that we could look at. I think the Leland corridor plan was an attempt at trying to find solutions, but they're long-term solutions. So that's probably what we're going to come up against, is some of the solutions you'd probably like to see if it were just redoing of the study. I don't necessarily see that getting to the goal, because we may find the same results. And if it takes capital like what was recommended in the Lynn Avenue corridor study, it was kind of it was costly capital that we know we'll have to pursue grants to obtain. So, but I'd be happy to meet with you and go through it, because I respect the work that you put into that information, and maybe there'll be some pearls in that we can pull out and kind of focus on.
I would appreciate that. Would it be best if I phone you at some point and we just set up a time to get together when you're not?
Yeah, that would be
you have
good.
some free time.
Yeah.
And then if we could discuss it at a meeting in a couple months, and that would be more organized and a good way to do it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, thank you, John, for offering that.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, John, and if you could assist this committee by, after you have your conversation, identify the key policy issues that are in question, which ones we can do anything about, and so we can kind of focus on what kind of results we want from the discussion.
Right.
Yes, Bob.
As I see it, he has mentioned the magic word process, and that's a legal issue versus standards, which are, traffic standards and things of that, which are more or less engineering. So you've got a two-headed monster here. If you don't recognize that, that's my judgments, and the process is controlled by by legal standards. So you might want to keep that in mind. You know, I know that you mentioned that it wasn't due process taken into account here in reviewing those traffic patterns and standards. So, John, you mentioned, you know, getting something done, and it's got to be done through a legal process, no matter how you approach it.
Right, for our discussion, maybe you can identify that this is a process question or issue, this is a technical question or issue, and so you can kind of guide us.
Right.
We may or may not have some stepping stones that we can put our fingers on.
Yes. So, Mr. Simon, let's get together.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
The next item is new business, item 5A, Dutch Brothers study and multi-lane roundabout presentation.
Right, so at the last meeting, there was some conversation about Dutch Brothers that came, I think, from citizen comment, and also, I think, from the TAC was a request for further presentation on multi-lane roundabouts. And so I'll invite Hermanus Stein from Kittleson and Associates. He is Hermanus has been working with the city on various projects for many, many years, and I've gotten to know him over the last few years as really the regional expert on a lot of traffic-related or transportation-related solutions. He was one of the lead. He was the lead engineer on some of the concepts that came out of Kittleson Associates for the Jug Handle project. He also did we had a small study that was done for Dutch Brothers, so Hermanus took on most of that effort. He's definitely a national expert in roundabouts and a lot of transportation-related expertise. So I asked him very last minute, very last minute, because Lisa reminded me that, hey, John, here's what we need to do for the TAC. And I said, oh, I bet you we won't be able to get Hermanus. But he agreed, I think, on a Friday afternoon to be here tonight. And he said, I can throw some slides together to help with this topic. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is we talked a little bit just before this about time. And we don't have much on tonight's agenda. And while I don't want to draw this meeting out too long, we're also recording this meeting. And both of these topics, I think, have the potential to have, the solutions aren't short-term solutions for either of these projects. And so having that on video and using it as a reference video is something I'd like to do. And so with that, I just kind of want to give Hermanus some latitude to take a little bit, maybe more time than what he usually does, and make sure we get all your get presented what he's prepared to present, and then maybe get some of your answers or questions answered. So unless, Bob, you say no, we need to keep this short.
No, I think it's a subject that really needs to be
Okay.
well
So with
covered.
that, Hermanus, you've got the floor.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share what John said. There's two portions of this presentation. The first one will focus on the Dutch Brothers one, and then the second one will be on the multi-lane roundabouts. So this is just a quick picture. As John said, we did a little study for the city. I think this was at the end of 2013. And then there's a few things that we looked at. We visited the site during the different peak periods. So the top picture you see on the screen is really showing that westbound queue. So the people coming down the hill that wants to go in there into the Dutch Brothers that stack sometimes onto the railroad tracks. The picture at the bottom is really where people coming from Highway 99, and then wants to make a left into the driveway, and then people basically passing on the shoulder. So there's definitely a few things that you are probably very familiar with. Some of the other things that's happening in that project vicinity is basically the westbound queue towards 99. So you can see that queue extends past the driveway. So, and you can see if you look at the far end of the top picture, that's the 99 signal. So people need to find a gap or wait for their turn to turn at the signal. The other thing is, when you look at the Dutch Bros access on Main Street, you'll see on that picture that people are actually exiting on the wrong side of the driveway. So it's just how the site is laid out. There's just some challenges that one needs to take a quick look at. So we brainstorm a lot of ideas. So I have a few slides on some of the concepts that we explored. I'll provide a quick highlight. And then the last one is really that we came up with that we think is really worth considering to taking to another level. So the first option on the left-hand side, it's probably what a lot of private owners don't necessarily appreciate, is putting a median down and basically prevent that left turn into the site. And that has some challenges and some circulation things that will happen and the dynamics of that site. And then the other thing is, you'll see probably a little theme on site is really try to make it more a one-way system and create that opportunity to form two lines. So you'll see is these two lines basically from the driveway, rather than forming one line and people stacking. You can actually get an extra 2-3 cars on site if they side by side, and then they just alternate as they basically enter the driveway area. So that was one option on the left. On the right-hand side, there's another one where we were considering what if we restripe 10th Avenue. So you take the 3 lanes that's there today, so the westbound, the 2 lanes towards 99, and the one coming up the hill, and we restripe that to a 3-lane facility. You make that center lane basically a 2-way center turn lane, so you allow that left, and so you create the space that the throughs can go. Some of the challenges we foresee over here is just that queuing. I mean, although everybody queue on the outside lane to eventually get to 99, is what do you do with those left turns? How do people access to make a left onto Main Street? So there were some challenges on this configuration as well. Then in the next one, these are a little bit outside the box. So this is the pieces that's probably late in the game, but this is what if we had a clean site, and what can we do? So the one on the left-hand side basically shows, or both of them shows no access onto 10th Avenue. And then both have accesses basically off Main Street. So the one is creating a little loop, so you need to relocate the building. Both of them, you basically need to relocate the building. So it's probably not desirable because you'll have to close the business and rebuild everything. So, but again, I think sometimes when you think of these outside the box options, you actually may trigger another idea that you haven't thought about, and sometimes working with a property owner may trigger some other thoughts. So the last one that we think has some merit to discuss is, again, I think on-site, if we change it to a one-way system, so you create that opportunity to provide more on-site queuing, and then you simplify the exit onto Main Street, so you only have one way, so that you don't have that friction that people are trying to come in and people are going to try to exit. So that's one opportunity. And then if you look on the 10th Avenue, the 10th Street configuration, is to do some restriping. And as John and I talked about it, maybe that portion on the left-hand side, on the bottom side, that's an open area that belongs to the city. Maybe we can do some restripe, maybe a little bit of widening, those type of things, and then really try to create that space for people to make left turns in. So you try to make sure that the through movements on 10th Street is still operating, but at least you can, I mean, you won't be able to accommodate all the queues on site, but at least you try to reorganize on how people basically access the site. So this is just a few quick thoughts. John, I don't know if you want to add to that, but so this is the option that we think has really some merit that we can probably take a deeper look at.
Well, the addition that I would make is that generally the first response from most of the citizens who think that we should do something there is to just close off the access on 10th. Don't allow, close it off to those cars that would maybe be coming up Singer Hill and want to make a left turn into the parking lot or into the driveway. And we've talked about that. That was one of the first options that was shown there. The concerns that we have is just the impacts without some kind of on-site changes like moving the building that would create would be significant at the intersection of 10th and Main. So we'd likely see backups at 10th and Main and create a whole set of problems at the intersection that don't exist today. So potentially we could spend some money and maybe just remaneuver the problem to yet another location. So we really don't see just providing a median that prohibits those left turns as a solution at all. I did talk to our economic development manager, Eric Underwood, about the idea, since the city does own that lot. It's for sale. Part of me was hoping that we'd get a buyer that would want to redevelop that lot, and at that time the city would have the opportunity to condition upon them frontage improvements. That still may happen. The cross slope across 10th Street at that location really drops off, so there's a large crown in that, and it really kind of drops to what used to be the old sidewalk there. It's at a much lower grade. So just striping this, I mean, the width is there. We could just stripe this, but I'm kind of concerned about that kind of drop off, and I'm also concerned about how it aligns with the rail arm actuator. And so I really want to make sure our curb alignment sends a clear message to the driver that this is a little different right away. Make sure our signage would be right. So I really feel like to do this right, we need frontage improvement of a complete frontage improvement that deals with both pedestrians and vehicles on that vacant lot side. But we think this is the right solution. I would say it's the best solution that we could do given the situation. Still not perfect. That queue provides for maybe 2 vehicles. The driveway striping could help management on the site, like they often do, with extra help there to kind of get people moving through and taking their orders early. That seems to help, but there's still going to be times when we're going to see more queuing on 10th Street than what that queue lane can handle. It's really just a matter of trying to minimize that to maybe just a few instances as opposed to an incident every day. But, it's a fair amount of capital for a little bit of improvement. And so that's where our position on this hasn't changed. It's really just trying to figure out how to finance a solution. And my hope was that we would have a developer that would develop that lot and help build a lot of that for us. But we're going to look into more details on the cost of those frontage improvements, make sure they're compliant. I don't know if you know this, but one of the City Commission's goals is to pursue quiet zone through Oregon City, which means safer vehicle and pedestrian crossings at any of our at-grade crossings. This is one of them. This is the main one, actually. So I don't want to build anything that's going to make that even more difficult in the future, or design anything that's going to make that even more difficult in the future. So we want to make sure we can accommodate that. The other challenge is that we've got a vacant lot there, and unless the city chooses to do something that would accommodate only walk-up customers, we still have to figure out a way to provide access to that, and that complicates it even a little bit more. So again, like the Dutch Brothers site, this is a difficult site. I think in today's standards, the Dutch Brothers wouldn't have been approved, but it is there, and it's a good business, and I think we needed some kind of a compromise there for that to be the right solution. But I want it to be the best and the right solution.
Is there any kind of a traffic study that could be made so we could have some idea of the degree of improvement, or whether it would stay the same?
You mean beyond what we've already done?
Well, yes. For example, rush hour backup on Singer Hill coming down the hill, a lot of that is caused by people going into there, and then there's backup clear back to McLaughlin Boulevard. I don't know how you would do a study on mitigation of those circumstances, whether it would be worth spending the kind of money to restripe and improve the pavement there on that one side. I don't know. But we do have a citizen comment that maybe Denise McGriff would have some.
Well, maybe, I don't, did you have any thoughts on what kind of study we might pursue there other than a design that would kind of estimate those costs?
I think the challenge, as you said, with studying is it's a combination of the queue to 99 and that queue probably have vehicles that also wants to access the site. I'm trying to recall on the study. I mean, we have some traffic counts where people are coming from, turning into that site. I think if you really look at the patterns, the existing patterns that we counted in 2013, it almost operates like a one-way system. So I think that will help that may help some of that friction on site, that people may actually get there. So you can get maybe, as John said, 2, 3, 4 cars that's actually out of the queue. I mean, you're not going to fix the challenge that we have out there, but you're going to make it a little bit better. But I mean, to analyze it, it will be, I don't think there's an easy way to do it necessarily. You'll have to basically track every car coming in, and you count them, and then you need to make some estimation if you do this option, how many can you actually save here or store here, and how many there. So,
Yeah.
bit of a puzzle that you need to build.
Okay. Denise?
I don't like.
Oh, yes, you.
Not today. Hi, thank you. Denise McGriff. I live here in Oregon City, and as a matter of fact, most of you know I live just above this. Wanted to bring to your attention that the 3 proposals that have been shown you are based on logic. And unfortunately, the drivers that are going into Dutch Brothers are not logical, most of them. I use this route daily, sometimes more than once a day, because I'm going downtown and then on my way over to West Lynn to do errands. The things that you may not have seen was yesterday in coming down the hill around 2 o'clock, not only were they backed up Singer Hill, but they were backed up on the 10th Street section, causing a backup on Main Street because somebody decided to put their car halfway across the lane to go in to make sure that they were getting in the gap, which there was no gap, so they could get into Dutch Brothers. That's what I saw yesterday. Coming back home from the movies the other night at around, believe it or not, 11 o'clock, I saw something very similar, except coming in the opposite direction. And I thought, well, and I should say for the caveat, I am not a coffee drinker. So I'm not going to be one of the people queuing to get into Dutch Brothers. But when Henry and I were both working for the city, this was a bank. And it did not have nearly the amount of traffic that this particular facility. And I have nothing against Dutch Brothers. They do have some facilities, I don't know if you've seen them, that have double lanes. Now, it seems to me they maybe could add another bay to get 2 cars in at the same time, even though they do have people going out and taking orders and all that. But frequently what I see, again, as I use this regularly, is that not only are they queuing with half a car kind of hanging over the railroad tracks, but you've got everybody else backed up, and people do, if that one lane to go to the left is free, people will go around them. I had myself done it. The ones that I think cause probably 90% of the problems are the people who are trying to go to the cafe in the opposite direction, going up the hill, and then there they sit, and then the next guy is behind them and behind them, and sometimes people are really nice and they let them in. Other times, people get a little riled and they don't let them in, and so they're sitting there. So I think, I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I think Dutch Brothers needs to be part of the solution. And I really think that, the number of near accidents that I have seen there, plus the accidents I have observed there, it's just not a good situation. And I don't know if it's because people are coffee deprived and they need to get there, and they're or what's going on. But obviously they must make really good coffee because it seems to be really busy, and it's not just certain times of the day. It's pretty much throughout the day, constantly. Except I think the only time I didn't see a queue was at about midnight. They were open. There's one car in there, and there was no backup. So I think, obviously in the best world of all possible worlds, I would love to see a median there. Same way I would like to see a median at 7th and Washington, so that people don't come down, try to cross over to get into the 7-Eleven, because that's another one of those little accident places where people do crazy stuff. But maybe they are going for 7-Eleven coffee, I don't know. So that's just from my own personal observations since I've moved here. I've seen this. It just seems to get a little worse every day when people do not exercise reasonableness and driver courtesy there, because they got to get their coffee.
Okay, thank you.
Bob?
Yes.
Denise raises I think the paramount issue in this whole thing. It's irrationality. If it were logical, I mean, we could probably deal with it. But it's the irrational one-time driver that's going to cause something to happen down there that's going to involve a train. And it's that irrationality that we're dealing with that I think as public officials, we have a responsibility to stand up and address this problem.
It's been a long time since we had a train push a car way down those tracks.
It's going to happen.
People objected when I said it was a long time since the train ran into one of the pedestrians down there.
One thing that John Anderson sent me an email, or did we have a conversation? I can't remember now. But
I emailed you.
Yeah. So, and I haven't done anything with that other than pondered that, which was, is there a location that Dutch Brothers in the city might consider a few blocks down the street where there's a vacant parcel that maybe could be a trade or a sale or something like that?
I know a spot.
So, you know a spot? Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the city parking lot that nobody uses.
Yeah. So.
Point of information, John.
Yeah.
The city in the NUC zone does not allow drive-throughs. That's part of the problem. There would have to be a major exception to allow them to move someplace else unless they were in a different zone.
So this sounds like a major exception, don't you think?
I can't speak to that.
I can't either, but I'm just telling you.
That might be a potential conflict for Bob and I, but that's part of the problem. We don't allow drive-thrus anymore.
I'm trying to pass through.
How long has it been since we have not allowed drive-thrus?
It must be new, because Dutch Brothers has the drive-through that's not that old up on the hilltop. So I'm not sure.
They're in a shopping center. They have no access onto the street on Malala Avenue.
Oh, I see. So that's the difference.
Yeah.
That big dog up there that's no longer in business, that was a drive-through.
Yeah, that was a shopping center too then. So, I don't know the code on that particular item, but I thought the suggestion was good and something we should think about, and that's the kind of follow-up that I haven't done yet. So, but other than that...
Well, as a manager, as a department director, you're allowed to ponder.
Oh, thanks.
In your free time.
Undercover boss.
I appreciate it.
CBS show.
Can we get a motion on that? All right.
If I could ask if I could ask a question here. Has anyone talked to the owner or franchisee of the Dutch Brothers here, and are they aware of the problem, and are they concerned about it, and have they offered help with any solutions you might come up with?
They have been talked to, and they have been, willing to work within, the area that they can control. It's been probably over a year since I've talked to them, and this issue's come back up. So, striping is something they were interested in doing, and I think they'd like to have the lot across the street from them as well, so that
Coming and going.
have them coming and going. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but I think they are a willing partner, but they have some real challenges. I think if you've noticed their staff out there trying to take drink orders early, that's an indication of their willingness to try and move that. And they do move vehicles through there at a pretty fast pace, but it's apparently a bank that got converted to something that generates a heck of a lot more traffic, and something that I think considered by the staff you have today, it probably would have got denied.
Another question I had is, when they came in, built this Dutch Brothers, did they have a traffic study prepared? And was there any conditions put on the development? Like if traffic gets bad, then they have to do something to help modify it?
You know, I don't know that, Gary.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that, but I'll follow up on that.
And my other question is,
Denise, were you on the planning commission at the time? Or?
No, I was not. I was the chair of the neighborhood back several years ago when this came through. It went through a minor site plan and design review. A traffic study is not required for that. They did not make any alterations to the building whatsoever, other than putting a new sign up and painting it. So when you have that level, that small level of impact, there are no other requirements that the city has through its site plan and design review process to require that. And because it had already been a drive-up facility, obviously not the same volume of traffic, the city's code does not allow for additional requirements that are not related to what the applicant is doing. So nothing happened. We at the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, because I was the land use chair at the time, pointed out that this was going to generate far more traffic than the drive-up bank. And again, because of the way our code is written, they made a minor modification to the building. There's no additional requirements that the code has, and that would apply to anybody. So if you go into an existing building, you paint it, you put up some new ADA signs, that's as much as the city can require them to do. So that's why there was no traffic study or any other requirements.
Okay.
Very minor.
So, presuming that this is a pretty lucrative spot for them, and you said they had some interest in the other side, so if they added a second one on the city's vacant lot over on this side, and you put in a median the whole length of 10th from the intersection all the way back, then cars coming down the hill could take a right turn in, and that would be one way only, come out just like it's shown there. Cars coming inbound would turn right into this lot and they'd get back onto Main Street. So they'd have right turns, and there'd be a complete divider, and nobody's turning left in that block.
John, you can't have a flow through on a new facility in that zone.
Well, I heard that, but I mean, you maybe work on
An exception?
exception, you know. So all I'm just saying is, that's just, maybe it's outside of the box, but that's another way to do it. That way they have some expense, they have to have a second shop, but they get rid of the problem, and the city's got a nice divider on 10th, and you get rid of the left turns both directions, it's done.
And they sell the property.
I don't disagree.
One other comment I had is that you could possibly justify trying to close that entrance on 10th Street if the queue of cars either trying to turn into Dutch Brothers or just caught in traffic are actually stopping on the tracks. And that would be a safety problem, and you would be justified in trying to do something about that.
I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's a fair amount of effort that went into the signalization on the tracks to warn folks of that concern. So as traffic backs up, the lights come flashing on, and the idea is to educate them. But when you know, only the rational drivers. So we're back to the irrational piece.
So, what would be our next step, rather than just let this drop by the wayside? Where do we go from here?
Well, I need to pursue this idea of whether there's an opportunity for additional Dutch Brothers development in the downtown area somewhere, whether that be on a second one on this vacant lot here or a vacant lot down the street, which I think you know is 12th and Main. That's that vacant lot. I think the city's got higher expectations for that lot at 12th and Main, so I'm not sure that's going to go very far. But the best our recommendation at this point is to pursue at least a cost estimate for an improvement similar to this that we're showing here that would help with at least a safer ability for vehicles to maneuver around those left turn vehicles. The downhill traffic still, if it's backing up Singer Hill, then it's just going to be a traffic delay. And then working with the property owner to ensure that they keep that traffic moving.
Hey, John, if the problem is caused by the property, and if the solution is on public property but related to the private property, would it be possible to have them kick in some of the funding?
I'm trying to think what mechanism we could force that, short of, threatening to close the driveway altogether.
Offering Bancrofting to them might work.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Henry.
Well, my opinion on that property across the street from them that the city owns is I can't imagine the city ever been able to sell that property. I mean, it has no desirable properties whatsoever. And so I think that option of them moving another kiosk over to that side would be something worth talking to them about. But of course, then we'd have to get the cooperation of the city to release that property, which is unsellable anyway. That's only Bob LaSalle's opinion.
Yeah, Bob's opinion is unsellable. I'm sure somebody else would say it is, but that's an idea we carry forward and have a conversation and figure out whether or not we want to, ask that question. It's an urban. I think I don't know that's an urban renewal property, but it's something that Eric Underwood manages. So I'll check in with him, see if we want to talk more about that.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, then we'll move on to the Public Works report.
No, we've still got the roundabouts. We haven't talked about the roundabouts yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sure glad I've got
that's
you
the
guys
main
around
topic.
to keep me in check here. Roundabouts.
So as John mentioned that I put some slides together. So Kittleson and Associates, we're privileged to have been involved with developing the national guides on the roundabout.
Okay.
And we're actually busy with ongoing work with FSWA to look at more things as challenges arise. So I try to weave some of that information into this presentation as well. So just some of these slides will go fairly quick. Again, I think everybody is familiar on how a roundabout operates. You basically yield on the entries. The one other goal is you really want to slow people down. So the geometry, how you approach the roundabout, you want to make sure that they slow down. So we design those with specific radii to make sure that they basically enter the roundabout between 20 and 25 miles an hour. Just a little bit of history. So in 95, this is a little map that shows where roundabouts were located without the US, and about 18 years later, this is how it looks now. So it is a great tool for addressing operations and safety, and I'll definitely highlight some of the safety aspects associated with roundabouts. This is just another way of showing some information. So you'll see the pie chart on the left side is basically there's most of the roundabouts are basically 3 legs or 4-legged roundabouts. There are 5-legged roundabouts, and I know the city is considering in some locations those. So it's a low percentage, but they are. I've been involved with the multi-lane roundabout right in the middle of a huge shopping center in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it's worked really fine. But there's some things that complicates those, and that's the signing, because in a typical intersection, you make a right, a through, or a left. Well, if you have 5 legs, 2 rights, 1 through, and 1 left, or those type of things. So you need to provide more diagrammatical signing to help guide people through it. And then the pie chart on the right side is really showing that multi-lanes is about 30% of the roundabouts that's been installed in the US. There's a whole configuration. We have mini roundabouts, single lane roundabouts, multi-lane. urban versus rural, low speed, high speed environment. I think what that means is it's not a high speed roundabout. The roundabout is all designed to enter at 20, 25 miles an hour. The high speed environment is, for instance, if you put it on an arterial where you have 45 miles an hour people have been traveling. So you need to take special care on how you slow people appropriate down to that desired speed at the entries. There's some challenges sometimes, especially with multi-lanes, and I highlight those from a multimodal perspective. And then also, I mean, is it the first roundabout in the community or not? I've been involved with the one that was installed as part of the jack handle as well, and I believe that one is operating fairly great. So this is just, I already highlighted maybe the top right in this in this table, the multi-lane roundabout and the desirable maximum entry speed. That's really the thing that you try to do. And single lane roundabouts is a little bit easier. Multi-lanes, you have more pavement, and people don't always stay in their lanes. They try to cut the corners, so that's why when you design a multi-lane roundabout, you need to make sure there's good deflection. So you use the curbs and how you lay it out, you slow people down. You don't rely on a sign and the striping, basically. I think the others are fairly self-explanatory on these. It's just different sizes and the volumes it can handle. So maybe with this one, it's just to highlight that you basically make a decision before you enter the roundabout. So you pick a lane, and that's why the signing becomes fairly critical. I mean, this one is fairly easy because you have two lanes going through and everything is fine. But sometimes you lay it out where the leftmost lane actually becomes a left turn into the roundabout and you can't go through. So those type of things when you lay out the roundabout is very important. So it's basically trying to understand how that roundabout operates, and that's determined by the travel patterns and how the volumes are distributed throughout the intersection. These are just a variety of...
Hermanus, is that much different than, say, good signage at a signal where you need to get in a turn pocket for a left turn or a right turn or three lane, right?
So the other thing is that you can also do is sometimes you can, rather than trapping a lane, you can actually create that extra turn pocket. And it's basically coming down to good geometric design and channelization. So there's a few things that you can do about it. So, I mean, that's definitely, we can definitely look at that. So roundabouts has been installed in many settings. I think sometimes there are a few myths out there that roundabouts are not installed at blah, blah, blah. We've installed basically everywhere. So it's residential sub-areas, small towns, urban centers. So the one at the bottom left, that's actually a multi-lane. It's an oval one. I have another picture of it. And that was probably installed in the 90s. And there has been some tweaks to that to improve it, but it handles a lot of traffic. I think that's a 6-legged roundabout. Rural areas, that's been really where Maryland started with roundabouts in the rural settings because it takes those T-bone type crashes out. Taurus, this is one in Astoria, the top left. The one on the top right is right in the middle of a shopping center. Sometimes people have concerns about snowy areas. They've been installed. A lot of the northern mid-states have done a lot of roundabouts. You can snow plow it, so there's no excuses necessarily. Schools, it's actually been installed in a lot of schools as well because you slow people down, and then how you handle the schools is actually pretty nice. Then I have a few examples of multi-lane roundabouts. People are probably fairly Springfield. If you travel down there, they have a few multi-lane roundabouts. The one that's probably close here that you may have gone through is the one at Stafford Borland in Clackamas County. That one, I don't know if you guys recall, but it used to be a 4 all-way stop, and you can probably remember the queues. The queues are not there anymore. I think that's the short answer. And then these are just the top left one is in Bend. Bend is very familiar with their roundabouts. And then there's one in Carmel, Indiana. Interesting little side note of Carmel, Indiana. I think they have more roundabouts that signals in their little town. So, and then this is the oval on Townsend, Maryland. And then in Colorado, they've done many corridors that actually along arterials that has multi-lane. So the U.S. has gone a long way.
Hey, Hermanus, can you go back? How close that right-hand picture looks like? Is that a roundabout in the distance too?
So I don't know if this.
There's three of them.
Yeah, so
It
these.
looks like 3 of them.
Oh, there are.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't even
it's
see the bottom
basic.
one.
Yeah, so these two, the first two, that's the one in the bottom left of the corner, that's, I think it's a T intersection. And then you have the next roundabout that's serving properties, or it's probably a collector or something. And then the next one is actually a ramp terminal. And on the other side of that bridge that's not on the picture is another ramp terminal, also a roundabout. And then we've actually been involved now with a project that we're designing for WASDOT, that we're putting 3 multi-lane roundabouts in a row. As well as also with WASDOT in Clark County, we're looking at another one. We're going to put 4 multi-lane roundabouts in a row, and it's just, there's some benefit of using those, and I'll try to highlight some of those things as we go through these.
As a driver, it's mind-bending.
Yeah, so I mean, again, if it's a roundabout in a community that's not used to it, there's definitely an education piece, and I'll have a slide at the end that shows some before and after perceptions as well. So. But yeah, there's people need to get used to them. So this is the second roundabout informational guide. This is a lot of great information. If you ever have time to page through it, it's accessible via our website. If you just search NCHRP Report 672, you'll get to it. There's a PDF copy. It's a great thing. There's a lot of stuff that's out in there that's very valuable. And there's a lot of other guides, the Highway Capacity Manual, Highway Safety Manual. There's a lot of data about roundabouts, so it is not a new thing anymore. The first guide that we developed in 2000 was based on European and Australia data. This guide is based on US data, so it's bringing it home for our drivers, because, I mean, where if you actually look in Bend, there's so many roundabouts, people are used to roundabouts, so you actually get more capacity out of roundabouts if you compare it with a roundabout that's a first one within an area. So people just need to get used to it, get familiar with how they operate, so it's pretty neat. Maybe just look at the pictures. What you really try to address with roundabouts is you try to address the angle crashes. So the one at the top right is basically that people try to make a left right in front of the other one. That usually leads to an injury crash. The other one, we just in the middle, basically, where they cross each other, try to take a gap that they shouldn't take. And in a roundabout, it's basically you slow them down. So at entry, our goal is to slow them down to 20 miles an hour. The people that's circulating is typically, just based on the geometry, is probably between 10 and 15 miles an hour. So if anybody hits, it's basically a fender bender. So and you'll see the safety data that supports those. Conflict points. There's probably too much technical detail, but there's a lot of potential conflicts at a typical intersection. The roundabouts, you take all those left turns and right turns and you go them through the same spot. So the conflict points are less. It's the same volume that's going through there, but you can really address some of the focus on where you need to put your emphasis. So this is a lot of this is out of that research report. Maybe since we're talking about double lane roundabouts, if you look at the bottom line, where it says double lane roundabouts in urban suburban areas. So this was converted basically from two-way stop control, those type of intersections, some signalized intersection. So the one thing is that's different for multi-lane roundabouts is that the number of crashes, you have a reduction in the total number of crashes, but it's about, it's 18%, and there's, of course, it's plus or minus based on the data spread. But the one thing that doesn't matter if it's a single or a multi-lane roundabout is really the percent reduction in injury crashes. And that's the previous slide that I showed. You take away that angle crashes and the T-bone crashes. And that's really where there's so much safety data out there that support that. From a safety perspective, the roundabout is really, it provides a lot of benefit in that sense. From an operational perspective, there's a lot going on. The Highway Capacity Manual in 2010 has calibrated models that's based on US data. We're also busy with another FSWA report that will probably be published later this year, where we took that to another level and basically collected data at roundabouts that have been in operation. So and then recalculated and redeveloped and derived new equations based on most regions. So you can see people are getting more familiar with roundabouts. So you actually get more capacity out of it as people get more familiar. So there's a lot of good information. As I said in the beginning, it really comes down to picking your lane as you enter the roundabout. So if you start on the left-hand side of that exhibit, you see the note double left turn lane configuration. So as you get to that intersection, if you want to make a left turn, you pick that lane. And then as you enter it, you'll see when you get next to the circulatory roadway, there's an exclusive left turn lane again. And then you go around and then you exit. So the main thing is, and that's what's important for multi-lane roundabouts and how you align them, that you position yourself before you enter an intersection. And that's the same for any conventional intersection. If you want to make a left turn, you go to the left and you stay in that lane. You're not staying in the through lane and suddenly want to cut across to make a left turn. You see that behavior, but I mean the goal is that people make their decision before they enter the roundabout. So these are some of the key things when you design a multi-lane roundabout. And that's really that entry. How do you position those lines? So typically what we try to do is when people wait, like at that bottom leg, those cars, you can see the one car is really oriented right into the median. And the one on the outside is really aligned to almost to the inside lane. So we call that the path overlap. So that's definitely something that we try to avoid. So we'll probably tweak this geometry if we want to address it. The same on the outside as well. Again, you can put some wonderful striping down there, but sometimes it's rainy and dark and you don't always see that striping. So you want to make sure that your geometry is really guiding the design and you don't rely on signing and striping necessarily. This is just another example about path overlap. It's just the very key things when you do roundabout design, especially for multi-lane. There's two things that you need to address: is slowing them down and make sure that as they align on the entries and exits, that they don't confuse and try to cut corners. Just a quick thing about sight distance. Again, the landscaping on what you provide, there's certain areas that you need to make sure it's low growing type stuff, and those are fairly applicable. And then another thing that is worth highlighting is really the multimodal perspective. So I'm not going to talk too much about the bicycles, but the one on the left hand side, you'll see we provide some bike ramps. So about 50 feet from the crosswalk, you provide a bike ramp. So what you try to do is you give the cyclist an option. You either take the center of the lane, and so if people that's more commuters on bikes, because they will feel comfortable in the sense that you're slowing the geometry, slow everybody down. And then if you mix a bike in traffic, I mean, if you go through the roundabout, you're at 10, 15 miles an hour. So that's how we design it. So the cars needs to slow down. So I think and that's why people that feel comfortable as a cyclist actually takes the lane and go through the roundabout. And on the other side, they get into the bike lane again. So the other option for the people that don't want to be in that unknown area within a lane, you provide the opportunity to provide a bike ramp that they actually exit, and then we make the sidewalk wider from that bike ramp throughout the roundabout. So you'll actually see in that leg that the sidewalk is fairly narrow, but as soon as the bike ramp is there, you make it wider because you want to make sure that the friction between the pets and the bikes are not, that there's enough room for everybody. So now I'll talk to if there's any questions about the bikes, feel free to interrupt me, but let's talk a little bit about the pedestrians. There's a lot of study, as I mentioned. There's a lot of FSWA really trying to be very proactive because it's a great tool from a safety perspective, and I think there's so much data that supports that, but how do we address the pedestrians? So let's look at those a little bit. I mean, the fortunate thing is I was responsible for the safety chapter on this new report that's coming out, and we looked at all the fatalities within the history of roundabouts in the US, and there's only 36, I think, when we had the data, and that's amazing. I mean, without the history from the 90s, whenever the roundabouts were installed over here. And then we also looked at injury crashes for two states, Washington and Wisconsin, and we really tried to delve down what are the reasons for those type of crashes. I mean, the fortunate thing is, back to the pedestrians, is there are not many reported pedestrian crashes, which is great. There's probably a lot of near misses. But I mean, we're thankful, and in the sense is, if there is a conflict between a pedestrian and a car, again, based on how we design it, it's a slower speed. And I'll have a slide about those as well. And then the other positive thing about the roundabouts, you basically provide a splitter island, so you basically cross one direction of traffic at a time. So in this picture, you see they cross basically the entry, they have an opportunity to wait in the median, and then they cross the exit again. So you try to simplify those. What do I need to take a gap in all? But maybe you look to the left, you get it, you get to the median, you look to the right, and then you cross again. The other thing that's really with us that's involved a lot of the research and the access board, the one that's really becoming a good professional discussion, I can put it that way, is really what do we do with the visual impairments because I mean it's amazing, and we've been part of some of that studies where they blindfolded you and say, okay, take a gap. And it's a different story when you do that type of stuff, when you need to try to find a gap with the newer cars, you don't hear them. So what cues can we give them to make an appropriate gap? So from an access board perspective, there's a website, and there's a lot of reading to do. But there's a few key things that's triggering a lot of discussion within the professional engineering industry. The one is to make sure that you define it, where's those edges that they need to be careful to enter the roadway. So you have a bike ramp, how do you make sure that people don't go down the bike ramp? And then also how you design the crossing. So there's a lot of refinement on those, and also where those crossings needs to be. And then the one thing is the single lane roundabouts, the access board has been fine with them, and it's fine. So you don't need any additional treatments as compared to the traditional signing that you have warning signs. But for multi-lane, some of the drafts that's been out there is really, and that's that phrase, pedestrian actuated signal. So what do we mean by that? And that's a tough thing because, I mean, the roundabout has so many benefits, and now if you signalize, it doesn't just become another signal. So there's some options that we've looked at. So everybody are familiar with the HARC signal, or I think the new technical term is the pedestrian hybrid beacon. So I don't know if there's anything close by here, but it is, we sometimes refer to it as the Mickey Mouse signal. So it rests in dark, so the top level it's dark, and people drive, and then it gets actuated. So the number 2 step, it's starting to flash, and then it goes to a steady yellow. And number 4 and then number 5, both those reds go on. And then that's when you actually get a formal green man signal that you can walk. And then, so that basically is a certain timing, and then it becomes red flashing. And based on what's in the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, that allows a driver, after they at a stop, they can actually proceed. So you don't have to wait for the whole time. And then after that, it's basically clear, and there's a lot of engineering behind these. It goes dark again. So that's one treatment. That's and we've actually, if we go to the next slide, we've actually, part of our research, we've looked at these type of treatments. So there's a HARC signal at the multi-lane roundabout in Golden, Colorado, where we looked at it. And those studies finding was that the pedestrian delays decrease because those signals create the gaps for them. So from a pedestrian perspective, that's better. The one thing is, from the blind pedestrian tended to cross when they could hear a gap, and not necessarily when the audible signal is on. So again, I think we try to do a lot of stuff to encourage and help everybody around it. And then still, I mean, even if there's a red indication, there were still people that ignore the signal. So it is just, I think it's that discussion we had earlier about what's reasonable and how people basically behave. So the other couple of things that we've seen, or that we've also studied and will be in the new report, is the one on the left-hand side is the rectangular rapid flash beacon. So that's, again, it's actuated, and it goes on, and you see that for a mile. So the roundabouts that we're designing in Washington, in WASDOT, that's their preferred thing. So again, if they consider a multi-lane roundabout, they basically, the design accommodate to install these when needed. So they will install a multi-lane roundabout, they'll monitor it, and then they actually will install multi-lane roundabouts. At this stage, They're not considering the HARC signal, the one with the Mickey Mouse one at this stage of it. But I mean, it's an evolving industry on how to treat these things. But WASDOT in Olympia, in an urban setting where there's a lot of pedestrians outside the WASDOT headquarters, they actually have a multi-lane roundabout with these rapid flash beacons, and the yielding behavior has been very successful. So that's why I think WASDOT is trying to be very proactive in that sense. And then the picture on the right-hand side, what people also try to do is basically provide a race crossing. So if people don't slow down about it's basically a speed bump for the crosswalk. So that's another way to try to slow people down. And so these are all different type of treatments that people have considered to slow the vehicles down, that when there is a conflict, that everybody's at a slow speed. Then I have a few more slides on design vehicles, because this also comes up where people will say, well, my truck don't fit through the roundabout. So these are just a few pictures out of California. This is one out of Portland. It's just what I always say, just tell me what truck you need to go through there, and we can design it that way. I think that's we just need to know. So I mean, single lane roundabouts, over tracking, I think that's the one thing that we hear from the trucking community is really, well, I got cited because when I was in the roundabout, my truck went into both lanes and I clipped a car that was trying to pass me in the roundabout, those type of things. So I know Oregon has passed some laws to address that issue. And each state basically try to do their own little thing. In Washington, they allow that if a truck, like any other intersection, you take all the pavement you need. So they don't just say a truck needs to stay within their lane. So that's one thing. So again, that's almost a principal decision you need to make before you finalize your roundabout. What do you want to do with trucks? Can they take all the pavement? It makes them smaller. If they want to stay in the lane, it usually gets a little bit bigger. So these are just a few pictures on how you still try to make it as compact. You put some truck aprons down to make sure that the trucks can go through those. And then, of course, we've done some fairly big trucks that we, again, if we know what they want, we can design for it. So, again, we've created a lot of these trucks. We've laid these out in parking lots to make sure that we actually can get these trucks through there. There's another one where it takes some planning. These guys need special permits. So again, if we know that they go through there, at least we make sure that we place the light poles, the signs, those in locations that we don't have to take those out. But they will drive over a few curbs. You design it that way. And then these are just the last couple of pictures that we recently went through with ODOT, where ODOT has been very quiet, the Oregon Department of Transportation, about roundabouts, and they were trying to work through these things in collaboration with the freight industry. So we're actually looking at two roundabouts, one out in the Region 4 and then one locally that you probably have heard in the news in Washington County with Verboort and 47th, where there was a few fatalities. So we basically designed it, laid it out on a huge park that is in Portland Meadows, where we invited the freight committee of the freight industry to bring whatever truck they want to bring, and we'll send them through there. So we actually prepared some. These are just a few pictures on how they go through there, and then based on this, we fine-tune the roundabout geometry. And I think this has created a lot of good opportunity to work with the freight industry and to define those. So these are just some of the things. I think this is one of my closing slides, is what's the public's perception. So I think if you think about the before studies, people are sometimes very negative about it. And this is real data, and this is based on the same location. So this is how people felt before it, negative. It's a little bit of positive. But then really, if you go to some of the after studies, those same people have shifted. And it's really trying to understand in the beginning is that trying to understand how roundabouts operate and the real benefit it provides. So again, I think if it's a new intersection treatment within a certain community, there's a lot of public education that needs to go out with that. But it is a great tool in the toolbox to consider for any type of intersection. So that is going through a lot of slides and a lot of information, and trust me, there's a lot of technical behind it. So if you want me to go back into some of these slides, I'll gladly do that as well. But I hope and trust this provided some good information.
John?
So if you have a typical intersection and 60-foot right-of-way coming in both ways. Is it possible within that 60-foot right-of-way in that intersection to get a single-lane roundabout, or do you need more right-of-way?
It depends. And I didn't really go into this mini roundabouts, but that I think is probably not what you were referring to. But mini roundabouts in subdivision, residential areas, you can squeeze those because people can almost drive over the center median, or over the central island. It's mountable. But typically a single lane roundabout, what we've seen is basically ranges, and if you go back to the table, it ranges, especially when you have transit going through there, buses, those type of things. We usually have gone down as low as 110-foot inscribed diameter up to 140-foot inscribed diameter. So that's basically the outside of your circulatory roadway, that dimension across. That's about 140. And then you have a nice landscape median. So what happens is, with roundabouts is, you have impacts in those corners, but because you don't have left turns and right turns, your segments as you approach, those sometimes you can make narrower. So sometimes it's that decision, okay, do I go for a 5-lane section or can I keep a 3-lane section and put a roundabout in? So you have right-of-way impacts at the intersections, but not necessarily along the segment. So those are some of the trade-offs between sometimes a signalizer and a roundabout. I mean, there's a lot of analysis that goes behind it, but typically a roundabout at the intersection, you touch all 4 corners. But the other thing is the flexibility with roundabouts is because you don't have to design for 40 miles an hour right through the intersection. You design it for people to enter at 20 miles an hour. So you can move that roundabout. So what we've done is, if there are historical properties or stuff that you want to avoid, we just shift the roundabout into one of those corners. Then you need to realign, but again, because you don't have to design for a 40 miles an hour alignment, you can actually really slow those down. So there are opportunities to look at different options with roundabouts.
One economic question quickly. So if you have a traditional traffic signal, 4-way traffic signal, and the cost for that long-term versus the cost for a roundabout, so you eliminate the traffic circles, how long does it take to break even, or how do you analyze that?
So, I mean, I don't have those numbers, but we have those tools, and we actually, on another research project for roundabouts, but we actually look at life cycle cost. But, I mean, what's happening in the community, what we've heard in the industry, is the investment cost for a roundabout is definitely more than a signal, the upfront cost. But I think if over time on the maintenance side, then the signal will catch up and then actually passes in the long run. But I don't have a specific number. And again, I mean, it's probably also with the agreements with the power and the maintenance and those type of things.
One thing I experienced up in Bend is just a few weeks ago, I came to a roundabout I wasn't familiar with, and I didn't know which street I had to exit, but I had a landmark, happened to be Hagen's, and so I missed my exit. But I just had to go right around the roundabout, and I knew exactly where I was going, rather than in a 4-way stop sign or signal. If you miss your street, then you have to go through residential neighborhoods to get turned back around and get back on the street again. So that's not a lot of thought has been given to that, but I experienced it personally. Yeah.
So, Bob, I guess I'd like to wrap this up with, first of all, thank you, Armanis, for bringing all that detail in a very short amount of preparation time, so I appreciate that. I didn't review the specifics of why this item came up, so it's probably in the minutes. I don't quite remember why, but maybe one of you does. And if so, I want to make sure we answered that question, because there's a lot of details here. We covered everything from trucks to pedestrians to signage to size. Only thing we really didn't cover is too much about cost, but that's going to vary a lot from location to location.
Were we discussing the 1-lane versus 2-lane roundabout? Is that what we were talking about? I see Lisa's nodding her head. So.
Yeah, that was the discussion, comparison between the 1 and 2 lane.
Because I think the one we've got planned right now, it's part 1 and part 2. It's kind of a mix.
Yeah, that's right.
So the big difference between, and that's why I basically highlighted the pedestrian piece. That's definitely that crossing of that multi-lanes. It's people may stop in the near lane, but what's happening on the outside lane? That's definitely, I think, where the access board really wants to refine what we're trying to do there. We don't have a golden answer yet to address those, but I mean the industry is looking at all eyes and all angles at that one. The one thing is, if you're just again looking at the bottom of this table, is the single lane roundabouts, you actually see the number of crashes are likely going to go down compared to whatever the intersection is. Well, if you look at the multi-lane, that number of crashes don't reduce that drastically. There will still be crashes, it's not you're going to take it away. But I think the key is to really look at is the bottom right of that table is the injury crashes. And that's the thing is what's so key to emphasize is, and that's the design of a roundabout is so important that you slow them down. Because if people collide or have a crash at a slow speed, the outcome is usually okay. While if you have 40 miles an hour and people try to make a turn right in front of you, that usually results in an injury crash. So those are some of the key things. And then I think why I highlighted some of the trucking things is there's also been a lot of studies, especially in the Midwest. They looked at different cases on how to handle trucks. Do you take all the pavement? Do you keep them in a lane? Do you keep them half into the adjacent lane? So there's a lot of discussion, and I know in Oregon, the freight industry has been very proactive on their needs as they go through roundabouts. So that's why I think those are some of the key things that at least when John and I talked about, I wanted to highlight.
Okay, well, thank you. That was very enlightening. A lot more thought goes into those than I ever thought.
Thanks, Armanis.
Okay, now do I have permission to go to the Public Works report?
Yes, you may.
Permission granted.
Thank you.
So really, we're just gonna hand out some hard copies. I think some of these you've seen. I already did. So I just want to keep emphasizing that we've got a variety of kinds of work going on around town. But this is specific to street maintenance, so your pavement maintenance utility fee dollars are what pay for most of this. So we've got everything in the map. So for those in the audience, there's extra copies here if you want them. I'll just set them up here. So we've got programmed this year some slurry seal projects, which are in red. The chip seal projects, we're hoping to work with the county on. They typically do the chip seal work for us, and there is some question about whether or not they're going to do that this year, but we're still programming to do it. We're still planning to do that. If we don't do chip seal this year, we may put it off till next year. And then micro seal, which is very similar to slurry seal. It's a heavier media and a little different mix. It cures out much quicker, so we can put it on places like Beaver Creek Road near the Red Soils area and do that without having a long 8-hour period of drying, so that we're affecting access to the county facilities, for instance. This is more of a 1-hour drying product, but we've been working on that. I think the other piece that's included is, so the preventative maintenance stuff, slurry seal, chip seal, micro seal, those are kind of lower cost, unit cost per square yard. So it might be $1.50 for a slurry seal. Chip seal might be closer to $3 or $4 a square yard. And then in the green is all the rehabilitation work that the city's planning on our streets. And one piece that I'll note is at Beaver Creek and Molalla. I don't know if you've noticed, but for years we've seen a low spot there that holds about 4 inches of water in the wintertime. So we'd like to rebuild that section in a way that will eliminate the ponding right there and then repave that stretch. The other thing I'll point out about Molalla is we did a paving job from really from Holmes Lane to Warner Milne and or close to Warner Milne. This time we're going to extend that another. Basically, it's a long block, but across the Hilltop Mall, Danielson's Mall shopping center there, and get it through the intersection. And then the rest of that, if you remember, we had a grant that we were pursuing a year or so ago, and so we're going to stop at the limits there and kind of continue to pursue that. If there's a grant opportunity that would help us rebuild that section, we still want to pursue that. So we're not going to go all the way down Malala. We're just going to cover really that area between Warner, Milne, and Beaver Creek Road. So the projects, the slurry seal projects have actually already awarded, and I don't recall, but we're going to get that work done earlier in the summer. Martin's here. Right on. July 22nd. Thank you, Martin. And then the rehabilitation work, which is the bigger, more expensive work, is out to bid right now. I think we've got it on the consent agenda for July meeting to award. I think that's July 1st. So, yeah, lots of work in the city with regard to pavement maintenance and putting that work, those dollars to good use. Oh, there's one other thing I want to mention. Now, with ADA requirements, the ruling has been that if we're doing a surface restoration or a rehabilitation kind of project, so if we mill off the pavement or put an overlay on or do anything more significant than, say, a slurry seal or a chip seal, the organization is obligated to take care of the ramps, all the corner ramps, the ADA ramps. And in fact, Scott sent me something that kind of gave me an indication that maybe the folks that oversee those policies would like to even have agencies look back and try and fix all those that were fixed years ago. But since 2013, we've been fixing ADA ramps using those PMUF dollars. And I'll point out that the ordinance allows that kind of use of those funds, but that was never the intent of those kind of funds. So I would say while so far we've been doing good work with our pavement maintenance dollars, the focus of that has changed to include ADA ramps, which means less pavement maintenance and more sidewalk maintenance. So keep that in mind.
Is anything going to be done with the sidewalks themselves in some of these rehabilitation zones? Like, my observation has been that most wheelchairs use the bike lane because the sidewalk is so poor in these areas they can't maneuver.
Yeah, you may be right, Thomas. I think in most cases, no, we're not planning to do sidewalk repairs. We may have included, Martin may remember, do we have anything for like alleyway repairs or any, typically that's the property owner's responsibility, but so no, not much.
There's a couple curves on 9th Street. Almost needs a step ladder to get up there.
Yeah, so you're gonna see solutions similar to what we did last year, where we'll probably have to take. So there may be a little more sidewalk where we've got large grade changes where we really have to carry that back a ways to fix that. But I don't know every ramp by heart, but I'm sure there's some like that.
Close to Taylor, just a block down.
Yeah. So with that, we're done. Or we may be done.
Chairman,
I don't know.
I got a quick question for John, if that's okay. So I think we're through the last year of the pre-programmed increases in the street utility fee. Is that right?
Well, I think they're still programmed for. I'm not recalling whether or not. I think we are in the last year. I think that increase has already happened.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I'm. Most of our ordinance allow for a 3% increase year after year, and I think that's true for this one as well.
Inflationary adjustments are the only thing after this year.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, given that, in the big picture, in your experience using this program for the last 5 or plus years, whatever it is, are we getting ahead of the curve, or are we still way behind the curve on being able to sustain the maintenance of the street system you have right now?
So we did a pre-survey, or we did another survey of our streets recently, and we saw the PCI go from what was a. So the PCI is our pavement condition
Right.
index. It's a number that we look at every street segment and we give it a rating. And we had a PCI of 61 2 years ago, and I think we've bumped that to 68 in the last survey. So our pavement conditions on average have gone up. So I would say that. Keep in mind that's a surface evaluation. So streets like, for instance, we did a project on Division Street not too long ago where Division was coming apart at the seams. And we know the solution for Division Street requires full street reconstruction. We should take that, core that down, build it based on the truck traffic and the kind of traffic we have on there. We should have done a much bigger fix, but we did some almost preventative maintenance. We basically milled 2 inches off and repaved that. But if you drive that section, you still see that fairly recent repair is failing again. So I'm still pretty concerned about some of our long-term needs on some of these bigger facilities. Malal is another one example of that, where we did a 2-inch mill and overlay. In theory, we probably should, based on the kind of truck traffic that we have on that and the kind of loads that we have, we should be doing reconstruction on those projects. And it doesn't take too many of those big reconstruction projects to consume the annual allocation for pavement maintenance. So I would say, yes, our pavement conditions are looking better, but I think that it's a little misguided because it's really just looking at the condition of the surface.
TriMet's hard on Division Street. There's so much TriMet traffic.
Yeah, bus traffic is pretty significant.
For some reason, the suspension system hits every bump and just pounds hard.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add to that one?
The audit and what FCS is doing. Do you want to talk about that?
Right. And that's on the work session, which I think is July 7th.
15th.
Oh,
we moved it to the 15th
Okay.
because of availability.
Okay, so July 15th, we're going to be bringing before. That wouldn't be a work session then.
No, it's
that's a
on
regular
regular
city commission meeting where we'll be presenting a lot of the evaluation work that we just talked about, and then our financial consultant who does most of our rate analysis for SDCs and other utility funds is going to be presenting, and then Martin, I think, is going to also present on some of the audit work that we did, mostly with our commercial accounts, to make sure they were trued up and where they should have been in terms of a billable rate. And there's, I think, in total, there's not much difference, but there are within the commercial billables, we found some differences that we need to work through. And so I don't know how much detail you go into on that, but that's scheduled to be something that we talk about on the 15th.
Is that all you had?
That's it.
Okay. Communications, Providence Willamette Falls Hospital update.
That was me.
Go for it, Henry.
Okay. Well, I did sit in on the McLaughlin neighborhood meeting where the hospital presented an overview of what they wanted to do with some property up there. And what it amounted to was they have a approved master plan for their development work at the hospital for the site, and they have picked up a couple of pieces of property that are currently outside of that approved boundary, and they want to bring those pieces into the approved boundary so that they can deal with it under the master plan. Also, there's 2 pieces of property that are inside the boundary but not zoned appropriately, and they want to rezone those. That was the basis of the meeting. There was lots of neighborhood discussion, as you can imagine, on development of the hospital and their overall goals and long-term usage and that sort of thing. But one of the things that did show up was that they are planning on this piece of property on 16th, between 15th and 16th, and west of Division, a 30,000 square foot building that would be used for essentially outpatient and leased space for private physicians with a parking lot. The things that I saw that may interest this committee would be pedestrian crossings from the hospital across Division, increased traffic for both the staff and the people using the facilities, and the alignment of 15th Street and Division. Potentially, I could see a traffic circle at 15th, or maybe elevating it to a traffic signal. Things that, it's also not a rectangular connection. The 15th Street does not come into Division at a good angle. So there's some things there from a geometric viewpoint. The hospital is expecting to have to redo that intersection. They did mention that in their presentation. So it's possible to have somebody from the hospital come over and go through that for us if we're interested. And I just wanted to bring it up just because I was there and it sounded like something that we might be interested in.
Great. Well, thank you for doing that.
Would bringing those 2 lots in, or 2 blocks in, would that be
2 lots, not
Oh,
blocks.
just 2 lots?
2 lots.
Oh, okay.
Facing onto 16th Street.
Okay. Denise had a. Denise, did you want to speak about this subject?
Sure, I'm sure Henry covered it all, but good evening again, Denise McGriff, and I'm actually here as the chair of the McLaughlin neighborhood for this particular item. Henry gave an overview of basically what happened at the meeting. We have requested to meet further with the staff of the Providence Willamette Falls in addition to their consultants. Their proposal for the master plan, I'm not going to say whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but basically there were just so many unanswered questions with regard to traffic, and some other issues that I suggested that rather than plowing ahead and meeting with the city staff, that we need to have another discussion, because I think some of the neighbors were a little bit dissatisfied because they were not able to answer many of the questions. Well, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And how is this going to affect? And people did make several suggestions, some good suggestions. And Henry had mentioned to me that he thought it would be prudent to bring it to you. And I totally agree with him, because I think there are some issues that are just a little bit bigger than, oh, we just want to do this. And I think that it's a good opportunity for John and his staff maybe to take a look at this ahead of the game before it gets to a land use hearing. And maybe there are some solutions that can be had up front as opposed to let's do it after the fact. So that's kind of where we're at. I just got an email this afternoon from one of the staff who's with Providence that I did not recognize, but she wanted to try to set up a meeting sometime after the 22nd of June, and I gave her some suggestions. So that's kind of the direction we would like to go in, and any involvement you would like to have in some of those informal discussions, or if somebody on this group, maybe Henry, wants to be involved in it, that would be most welcome. We're not looking at this as any sort of an adversarial position. We're looking at it from the standpoint of how can we minimize impacts and solve some problems at the same time. So that's really all I wanted to let you know, that we're trying to get ahead of the game by working proactively.
Henry, would you be interested in being our point person on this?
Sure.
Maybe if you, Denise?
Yes, sir.
Maybe you could involve Henry in your meetings. He has just volunteered to be our point person for the TAC.
He'd be a welcome and perfect candidate.
Okay, so you will communicate with
Yes,
him.
yes,
Great.
I have
Okay,
his
that's
email.
wonderful.
Okay, great, thank you.
She has my number.
Yes,
Yeah, I bet she does. She has most everybody.
and I know where he lives.
In more ways than one.
We have a long-standing, good working relationship with one another.
Okay. All right.
But yes,
Vaughn?
but yes, I think it would be helpful to have them, when they have a presentation, to have them here to go over it before they go to the land use, because I do see some ramifications from that we might be interested in.
Good. Okay. Anybody else got anything? Okay. Volunteer recognition event and flyer.
Sure. All right. So John will hand out the flyers to you. The event's on July 23rd, and the City Recorder's Office just wanted to make sure you understood that they're doing something slightly different this year. They're going to have food carts, 3 options. So attached to that flyer is a ticket for your dinner and a ticket for ice cream. And when you choose the food cart vendor of your choice, you'll put your ticket in their bucket. And then that's how they are paid at the end of the night. So you need to make sure that you put your ticket into the bucket for the vendor that you choose. So.
Okay, those are always nice occasions. It's kind of nice to be thanked a little bit in the city. And most of the time I've gone to them, it's pretty darn good food. All right. Future agenda items. Does anybody have any that they want to?
I got one.
So do I.
On 15th Street, could there be a sign, or we look at it, to keep gravel trucks and cement trucks from going up 15? Just the other day, I think one cement truck dropped about 2 wheelbarrows full of cement going up the hill when he shipped.
Oh, that real steep?
Yeah, the real
Oh,
steep part.
Yeah.
And I keep seeing always cement, you know. Is there a way we can keep the trucks from using that? You know, it's a fine if they do dump it. You know, fill up their cement.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm scared little.
Boy, I'll have to look into that. It's a little bit challenging on which kind of trucks. Obviously, if they're dumping, that's a citable issue.
Well, it's
but-
not dump, I mean, it's,
Yeah, but
on
I
a
mean,
cement
if-
truck, it's running out the top.
At the top.
He's over full.
Huh.
Especially what's this?
Well, Pearl Street would have the same issue,
What's the grade on 15?
about 15%.
Yeah, it's pretty steep. It might be more. Yeah, 15th and Pearl are.
It's
two
about
steepest.
halfway up.
Yep.
There was a dump. And then before, there's been a dump there before. But, and if there's a car behind there and those little rocks come flying off.
Well, I suppose if you had somebody standing by there, we wouldn't have to repave it for a long time.
You know, they could smooth it out, but they left it. They just kept on going.
Yeah, that could be a serious situation for somebody following with their car.
Yeah, I had one too.
Okay.
John?
I'm listening. I'm just.
Okay.
I'm writing too.
Would it be possible to get the 5-minute overview version of where the funding for the street operations and the capital projects that we're talking about are coming from, and roughly speaking, how much they are? I think there's some perception that perhaps we got money, and maybe that's not quite accurate.
We have money.
Well, yeah. How much? Where does it come
You mean
from?
like a short budget overview specific to Public Works?
Yes.
Not just transportation? Are you interested in all the utilities, or
Well, we have 2 funds that I know of that give funds. There's the gas tax, and there's our monthly maintenance fee.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, I don't. How are they spent? How much discretionary, shall we say, discretionary project money might there be, and what strings are kind of attached to those? If we were to talk about having roundabouts or pedestrian extensions, would that be outside of some of these funds? kind of to help us give a feel for what might be possible and attainable.
I heard a 5-minute overview. I'll try to do that
Well,
in 5 minutes.
You can take 10 if you want.
Okay. Yeah, we can present that. By that time, we'll have an adopted budget, and it'll be our first meeting back. Probably good idea.
I think to us to have a good discussion, if you had a summary section from the budget you could copy and send out to us to look in advance so we could see something, and that way have a chance to cogitate on it and maybe ask some decent questions.
Anybody else have anything? Okay, at the last commission meeting, as I mentioned earlier, I gave a presentation of the tax accomplishments in 2014, and the mayor and commissioners wanted to express their appreciation of all the hard work that we all do here on the TAC committee. They really appreciate the work we do, and realize that we're kind of independent sometimes because we don't have to get everything approved by them, but they also appreciate that too. So, if there's nothing further, this meeting is adjourned.